The piano never lied. That was the thing about music that Nora Callahan had not expected when she invented this life, that the instrument would become, in its quiet insistence, a confessional. Every evening in her narrow apartment above Rue Dauphine, the notes of Chopin's nocturne in B-flat minor would unspool from her fingers like a thread being pulled from something not quite finished unraveling. The neighbors assumed she was gifted. Her students assumed she was lonely in the beautiful artistic way that music teachers tend to be. They were only half right. New Orleans in October is still summer in disguise. The heat clings to the wrought iron balconies and pools in the low parts of the sidewalks, and the city smells of river water and fried things and old sweet rot, and nothing about it resembles the sky. That was why she had chosen it. 7 years ago, standing in the rain outside Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, with her discharge papers tucked under her arm and a name she was about to stop using, she had looked at a map of the United States and found the city farthest in spirit from the thinness of altitude. She had wanted weight, compression. She wanted a place that would press down on her the way 30,000 feet never could. She had been Lieutenant Nora Callahan of the 20th Fighter Wing before she became Ms. Nora Cole, piano teacher. Before New Orleans, she had been someone the Air Force quietly, carefully did not acknowledge. Her family, her father a deacon in a Baptist congregation outside Lubbock, Texas. Her mother a woman who quoted Corinthians at breakfast and meant it, had believed for 11 years that she worked in logistics. It was a word vague enough to contain multitudes. It contained, apparently, combat air patrols over the Sonoran Desert, classified intercept missions along the Arizona border, and one operation in the autumn that she never named aloud, not even in the dark, because to name it would be to make it permanent in a way that silence had not quite managed. She had met him during that operation. His name, the name he gave her, was Raphael. He flew for the other side of an equation she had been trained not to question. They had been, in the language of the mission, adversaries. In the language of 3 weeks in a safe house on the outskirts of Nogales, Arizona, they had been something the debrief forms had no field for. She had not reported it. She had not reported many things about that autumn, and eventually the weight of what she carried made the uniform feel like a costume she was only borrowing. She told her family she was leaving the military because God had called her back. It was the only language that would close the conversation. Her father had embraced her at the airport in Lubbock with the satisfied warmth of a man who had always believed the sky was not a woman's domain. She had let him hold that belief. She carried her own. In New Orleans, she taught scales to children and theory to adults, and on Thursday evenings, she played jazz standards at a bar on Frenchman Street, where the tips were good, and nobody asked about her past because everyone on Frenchman Street had one. She had, over 7 years, become something approaching a person. Not the person she had been at 31 in a cockpit at Mach 1.6, but a person, a quiet one. A woman who occasionally woke at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark listening to the ceiling fan tick and felt the particular loneliness of having been extraordinary in a way she could never explain. The girl came on a Wednesday. Nora was teaching a 12-year-old named Marcus his finger exercises when she heard the footsteps on the stairs. Lighter than a neighbor, more deliberate than a student. She finished the measure, told Marcus to run through it twice more, opened the door before the knock landed. The woman on the other side was 28 at most, with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from training. She wore civilian clothes, dark slacks, a grey jacket, and held a federal credential in her left hand with the practiced nonchalance of someone who had rehearsed this moment. Her right hand stayed visible, which Nora noted and appreciated. Ms. Callahan, the woman said. Not Cole. Callahan. Nora stepped back from the door without a word and let her in. The agent's name was Priya Vasquez, and she was 27, and she had found Nora the way good analysts found things, by following the shape of an absence. She had told no one in her office that she had been looking. She had told no one that she had read Nora Callahan's flight records the way other people read novels in stolen hours, in the margins of assigned work, building a picture of a pilot who had broken 11 training records at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, who had flown more classified intercept hours than any other female pilot in the wing's history, and who had simply stopped. The word in the file was voluntary separation. The word Priya used, alone at her desk at 2 in the morning with the record spread across her screen, was impossible. She sat now at Nora's kitchen table, with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't asked for, but hadn't refused, and she looked at the woman across from her, 41, unhurried, with the quiet precision of someone who never moved, without knowing why. And she said, "There's a man named Garrett Holt, former F-22 pilot. He went rogue 8 months ago. 3 weeks ago he stole a Raptor from a facility in Arizona. He is currently somewhere over West Texas using it to conduct what the Pentagon is calling an active aerial blackmail operation against multiple government targets." Nora said nothing. "He was trained at Holloman," Priya continued. "He knows every intercept protocol currently in service. He's been 2 steps ahead of every pilot we've scrambled. He is, by every metric we have, the best active combat pilot in North American airspace right now." Nora looked at her coffee. "Right now," she said carefully. "He is." Priya held her gaze. "You have more flight hours in an F-22 than any pilot currently on active service. Your intercept record has never been matched. And you are the only person we've identified who flew against Holt in training simulations and beat him consistently." The apartment was quiet, except for the ceiling fan and the distant sound of Marcus, downstairs, still running through his scales. Patient, methodical, striking each note as if it owed him something. Nora set her cup down. "How did you find me?" she asked, not defensively. The way a pilot asks about a radar signature, with professional respect for the mechanism. Priya allowed herself the smallest possible smile. "You file your taxes on time. It was honestly your only mistake." Outside, the heat pressed against the windows. Somewhere over the Gulf, a storm was building that the weather services had not yet named. And in a kitchen above Rue Dauphine, a woman who had spent 7 years learning to be smaller than she was, looked at a young agent who had spent months learning to find her, and felt for the first time since she could remember the precise and terrible sensation of being exactly the right size. They flew her to San Antonio that night. The facility outside the city was the kind of place that did not have a sign, and the people inside it did not introduce themselves by rank. A man with silver hair and a diplomat's handshake gave her a brief that lasted 40 minutes and answered, she noted, almost none of the questions she would have asked. He told her that Garrett Holt had issued specific demands to the Department of Defense, the declassification of a black budget program and the release of 3 detained contractors, and that he had demonstrated his leverage by conducting 2 unauthorized low-altitude passes over populated areas in West Texas, disabling traffic control radar in El Paso and triggering a temporary shutdown of Biggs Army Airfield. He told her the aircraft Holt had taken was fully armed. He told her the engagement rules. He did not tell her why every active duty pilot they had sent had come back without resolution. She was taken to a hangar. The F-22 Raptor sitting inside it was the color of graphite and storm cloud, and when Nora walked toward it, she felt something shift in her chest with the slow, tectonic inevitability of something that had always been going to happen. She had not been inside a cockpit in 7 years. She had told herself during those 7 years that she did not miss it. She understood now that this had been neither a lie nor the truth, but something more complicated. A postponement. A held breath. She climbed in. The ground crew watched her with the careful neutrality of people who had been told not to ask questions. Priya stood at the edge of the hangar with her arms folded and something in her expression that was not quite worry and not quite awe, but lived in the territory between them. Nora ran the pre-flight checks from memory. Her hands moved through the sequence with the fluency of a language the body does not forget, not the learned language of scales and fingering exercises, but the older one, the one written into muscle and reflex at Holloman in the desert of New Mexico, in those early mornings when the sky was the color of copper and the aircraft felt like an extension of the self rather than a machine being operated. She had believed for 7 years that she had left this behind. What she discovered, strapped into the cockpit over San Antonio, was that it had simply been waiting. Some things do not leave. They only agree to be quiet for a while. She was airborne at 2200 hours. The darkness over Texas is absolute in a way that requires experience to navigate. There is no glow except for the scattered constellations of small towns, Uvalde, Del Rio, the faint smear of light along the Rio Grande marking the border with Mexico, and above them nothing but stars and the aircraft's own instrumentation. Nora flew south toward the last confirmed radar contact, feeling the aircraft around her with the unsentimental attention of a surgeon, cataloging what had changed in 7 years of aviation technology and what had not, running a quiet internal calibration that Priya, monitoring from the ground, could not see and would not have been able to interpret if she could. She found him over Arizona. He was running dark, transponder off, radar absorbent in a Raptor designed for exactly that. But she had not been looking for his signal. She had been looking for his pattern. In training, Garrett Holt flew like a man having a conversation with the sky, all lateral movement and implied threats, feinting constantly, a style so recognizable that she had years ago suggested to an instructor that it was his tell. She picked it up in the ghost returns at the edge of her radar sweep. The characteristic oscillation, the way he held altitude like a man who trusted his own ceiling too much. She keyed the secure channel. Holt. A pause. Then, I wondered when they'd run out of other options. His voice was the same. Some people's voices contain their entire biography, and Garrett Holt's was like that, a hard Texas flatness, the sound of a man who had never been given anything and had decided early that the sky owed him everything it had withheld. You know I'm not here to negotiate, she said. I know why you're here, he said. Question is whether you know why you're there. She did not answer. She was already moving, banking south, dropping 1,000 feet, repositioning with the steady deliberateness that had always distinguished her from pilots who confused speed with advantage. She was thinking about the Arizona border below her, about the desert that lay across it, like something ancient refusing to be covered, about a safe house and 3 weeks and a man named Raphael, and the thing she had chosen not to report. And she was thinking about how many of the choices that had made her into the woman in this cockpit had been at their origin choices about what to protect by keeping silent. She was 60 nautical miles southwest of Tucson when the first anomaly appeared. It was small, a telemetry irregularity in the engagement authorization protocol, a sequence flag that should not have been present in a legitimate operational order. She almost dismissed it. 7 years was a long time, and protocols changed. But the flag was in a position she knew, a position she had been briefed on years ago as the marker for a specific type of exercise, a field evaluation, an assessment conducted without the subject's knowledge. She stared at it for 4 seconds. Then she understood. There was no blackmail operation, or rather, there was, but Garrett Holt was not conducting it alone. The demands, the stolen aircraft, the 2 radar shutdowns, real, all of it, constructed with precision by someone who understood how to build a scenario credible enough to pull her out of New Orleans into a hangar in San Antonio and into the sky over Arizona. The silver-haired man's briefing had been curated. The gaps in it, the things he hadn't explained, the questions the 40 minutes had been carefully designed not to answer, were the negative space of a picture she should have seen earlier. They had built this for her, not to stop Holt, to see if she could. She pulled back on the stick and climbed. At 32,000 feet, the sky has a particular quality of indifference. Nora had forgotten this, or not forgotten, but filed it in a part of herself she did not often visit. Up here, the categories that organized life below, obligation, identity, the accumulated weight of what other people needed her to be, became thin and provisional. The aircraft did not care that she had spent 7 years pretending to be smaller than she was. The altitude did not care about her father's theology, or her mother's Corinthians, or the silence she had maintained in the name of being loved by people who loved a version of her that did not exist. She keyed Holt again. How much of it is real, she asked. A long pause. The kind that contains a decision. The Raptor's real, he said. I did take it. I've been flying it for 3 weeks. Everything else? Another pause. They told me it was a black budget test program. That they needed someone willing to go all the way, that you'd never come back on your own. A sound that might have been a laugh. I told them you would. They didn't believe me. And you agreed to be the scenario. I owed someone a favor, he said. Also, I genuinely wanted to fly a Raptor again, and this was the only offer on the table. She climbed another 2,000 feet. Over the Arizona-Mexico border, the lights of Nogales appeared. 2 cities sharing a name across a line that divided them without entirely separating them. She had been there before. She knew what the city looked like from altitude, the way the border fence drew its thin scar through the desert floor, the way the mountains above Sonora went dark at the ridge. "They want to know if you're still operational," Holt said. "That's all this is. They burned your file when you walked. But someone with a long memory apparently needs a very specific capability, and has been looking for 7 years for a reason to put you back in the air. The demands, the blackmail, all theater. The real test is whether you'd find the flag. And if I hadn't, then they'd have let me run the scenario to its conclusion. You'd have intercepted me, and they'd have made you an offer based purely on your performance. The flag was—" He paused again. "A bonus. A way of seeing if the analyst in you survived the piano lessons." She was quiet for a long time. Below, the Sonoran desert spread itself in all directions with the patience of something that had existed before any of the categories currently organizing human life and would exist after. The mountains along the border were dark. The stars above were not. She thought about Priya Vasquez, 27 years old, standing at the edge of a hangar with something in her expression that was not quite worry and not quite awe. She thought about the girl who had spent months in the margins of assigned work, reconstructing a ghost. She thought about what it cost to admire someone from a distance and then to go and find them and tell them who they were. She thought about Raphael. She always thought about Raphael up here. That was one of the true things she had learned about altitude. It did not let you pretend. At 30,000 feet, the stories you told on the ground became transparent. She had loved him. Briefly, impossibly, in the grammar of a world neither of them controlled, she had loved him, and she had said nothing about it for 11 years because to say it would have been to ask a question she had no right to ask. What was she actually protecting, and for whom? She had protected her family's idea of her. She had protected a military career she then surrendered anyway. She had protected a silence that had, over 7 years, become so complete it had started to feel like a personality. She got back on the secure channel, not Holt's frequency, the ground channel. The silver-haired man was still there. People like that were always still there. "I found your flag," she said, a pause. "Yes. I want the name of whoever designed this program." Another pause. Longer. "That's non-negotiable," she said. The word arrived without heat, without performance. Simply the true weight of a person who has located the center of gravity of a situation and is standing in it. "I want the full architecture, not a briefing. The file. And I want 24 hours before you expect any kind of answer from me." She could hear the calculation on the other end. The cost-benefit assessment of a bureaucratic mind confronting a variable it had not fully modeled. "Agreed," he said finally. She closed the channel. Below, Holt was executing a slow, wide bank that had no tactical purpose. He was, she realized, just flying. Just being up here, in the only place that had ever made complete sense to either of them, watching the border lights and the dark mountains and the stars above Sonora, with the quiet greed of a man who knew this was probably his last time. She flew with him for 11 minutes. Neither of them said anything. It was the most honest conversation she'd had in 7 years. Then she turned northeast towards San Antonio and began her descent. Priya was waiting on the tarmac. It was past midnight. The Texas air was warm and smelled of fuel and dry grass, and the sky above the facility was enormous in the way that Texas skies are. Not merely large, but categorical, as if the state had negotiated more of it than other places. Nora climbed down from the cockpit and stood on the tarmac with her helmet under one arm and looked at the young agent who had found her and felt something she recognized only slowly as gratitude. Not for being found exactly, but for being found by someone who had looked hard enough to see what was actually there. "You found the flag," Priya said. It was not a question. "Yes. What are you going to do?" Nora looked up at the sky for a moment, then back at Priya. "I'm going to read the file," she said. "And then I'm going to make a choice, a real one, not one made by what my father needs to believe about me, or what the Air Force needs from me, or what 7 years of being invisible required." Priya was quiet. "And after that?" she asked. "After that," Nora said, "you won't find me again. Not because I'm hiding." She paused. "Because I'll be somewhere I actually chose." She handed Priya the helmet. The drive to San Antonio took 40 minutes. Nora sat in the back seat of the government car and watched the Texas night move past the window. The flat dark of the hill country, the occasional lights of a ranch, The blue-white glow of a gas station standing alone at a crossroads, as if placed there to remind passing travelers that someone, somewhere, was always open. She did not think about what she would decide. She had made the important decision already, up there, over the border, in the only place where she had ever been entirely honest with herself. Whatever came next, she would enter it as the person she actually was. Not the logistics worker, not the piano teacher, not the woman her family had needed her to be in order to keep loving her. Just Nora Callahan, lieutenant, pilot. The woman who had loved someone she wasn't supposed to and said nothing, who had walked away from a sky that was hers and spent 7 years learning to live without it, who had come back for one night and found, in the doing of it, that there was no self she needed to keep secret from anymore. The car reached the city. The lights of San Antonio rose around them, and above the lights, as always, the sky. She looked at it the way you look at something you're about to leave, with full attention, no flinching, the knowledge that the looking is itself a kind of goodbye and a kind of keeping. Then she looked away, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt the clean, specific lightness of a woman who has finally, at great cost and on her own terms, put something down.